What Matthew has to say is a lesson for all of us. A lesson in terms of where we go in the future, how we direct ourselves, and what we're going to do when we get there.
I just want to say I'm proud that I could view this with openness and not fear.
Hi, I'm Judy, and I'm from Long Island, and I've studied the prophecies for about 15 years, and I've never seen such a beautiful presentation with so much hope and so much love.
What I especially like about the program is the words for empowerment for everyone, feeling strong within yourself.
Somebody drop some love, that's
the healing meditations.
And in closing, I think Matthew's words say it best. God loves us all and directs us all.
Hi. I'm Matthew Woodcloud, and welcome. Glad you're here. This is just like a pit stop at the Indy 500, getting ready as quick as we could, and we did okay. I want to introduce you to Veronica Bonet in the back of the room there. She's the co-director of the Global Family, and helps in this workshop in this way and in other workshops in much more intimate ways that we do. The first thing I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about myself and then ask you why you're here, and we'll go from there. I basically am a former yuppie, and I would define a yuppie as not necessarily as someone who's successful and wealthy, but as someone whose credo is more is better. More cars, more corporations, more money, more prestige. And that was pretty much the way I lived my life, actually starting when I was 18 and a half, when I raised money for JC chapters by hiring and training telemarketing crews in 11 western states, until when I was 29, I had become involved in multi-level marketing, which is the best way to stretch yourself out that I know of. When I was 29, after 12 years of living in this way, eat, drink, sleep, work, I reached a point of stress in my body where the practitioner that I was going to at that time basically told me that if I did not change my lifestyle, that I would be in the hospital pretty soon. Most of my major organs were shutting down, and in his opinion, I was precancerous. So it took a while, but I finally threw in the towel on the partnership I was in and gradually left that behind. And I moved outside of Phoenix, where I was living at that time, to a little farming community called Camp Verde near Sedona, Arizona. And I lived out there for a couple of months. And during that time, my wife decided that that was not the lifestyle for her and started to talk about not only moving back to Phoenix, but separating. And so we had a separating of pathways at that point, while I simultaneously began feeling an overwhelming draw to go out and live in the wilderness. So she went back to her T-top Camaro in Phoenix in the fast lane, and I went back to the Mazatzal wilderness. On February 10th of 1986, I went out into the Mazatzals, which is the remotest desert wilderness in Arizona. And for most of the next 3 months, I lived out there, just wandering around that wilderness pretty much like a mountaineer. After 3 months of doing that, I began to see life a little bit differently, as you might imagine. And at the end of that 3-month time, I met Willie Whitefeather. He is a Cherokee medicine man who's been a very powerful teacher for me, and we'll be sharing some of his work, including this book here today. Willie told me the history of the world according to the Hopi when I met him, and I'll review that for you before we describe the Hopi prophecies. He also told me that he was having a vision quest that weekend, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with a vision quest. I wasn't, and I didn't realize that I had been on one for the last 3 months. But this vision quest was a formal, traditional Native American vision quest in which we did the sweat lodge ceremony to purify ourselves before. There was drumming and chanting and prayers to the Great Spirit, and we fasted and stayed out alone in the desert for 2.5 days, crying for a vision of our life's purpose and for a spirit or a medicine name. And at the dawn of the 3rd day of that quest, I actually did have a vision. I'd been up all night the night before, which is the tradition. And I saw that my purpose was to help other people to heal and redirect their lives, just like I had been doing with my own life. And I was looking at the crescent moon that was rising immediately before the sun did, and I began seeing these clouds around it, which were not there. There had been no clouds for several days in the desert. And this name, Moon Cloud, just sort of came into my forehead like that. And I was sort of in a stupor anyway from being up all night and fasting for 3 days and what have you. And it occurred to me after a few minutes, oh, that might be my medicine name. And in gathering back together at base camp after the quest was over, Willie Whitefeather mentioned to me that the moon, in the tradition in which I was questing, represented the feminine or the intuitive side of all of us, and that the clouds represent the natural flowing of nature. So that moon cloud means one who follows his intuition. And at the heart of every workshop that we do in the Global Family is this intention to facilitate for people a greater in-touchness and trust of their own inner guidance. And the reason that we're going to talk about the things that we are going to talk about this evening as far as earth changes go is not to make you experts on earth change phenomena or prophecy, but because the Hopi prophecies, the passages from Revelations in the Bible, and the map, the I Am America map that we're going to discuss, are the best tools that I have found to awaken an individual soul memory of why they are here and what their special and specific purpose is during this lifetime. And so as I left this vision quest with a new vision of healing and redirecting, helping others to heal and redirect their lives, and this name Moon Cloud, I went back to Phoenix and completely changed my life. I didn't see or interact with any of the people that I had been involved with in business. I started going to massage school. I taught Hatha yoga and began working with the Arizona Networking News. After about 6 months of that, I felt very good about my new focus in life and my new direction, but not about where I was living. In Phoenix, if you tell someone to breathe deeply, you're actually giving them some lousy advice. It's more like LA there all the time. And so I felt, again, a very strong inner prompting to move to the Pacific Northwest, a place I had never been in my travels before. And I ended up going up to Oregon and through a series of events, traveling through different communities, or what some people call communes, for 2 years, and learning about community or tribal life, if you will, and finding out that I wasn't as cool as I thought I was, and helping to heal myself of a lot of unresolved emotional baggage that I didn't even know I was carrying around with me. At the end of that time, I connected with Sun Bear, who is a Chippewa medicine man who spoke here at 3 o'clock today, who's also been a very powerful teacher of mine. And I went through his apprenticeship screening program and learned a lot more about the Native American way. And since that time, I have begun doing workshops, first in Spokane, Washington. And I came out here east on May 28th to do 3 of these Earth Changes workshops, all by special invitation at fairly small places. And since that time, we've done about 42 workshops for over 700 people in 5 states. So apparently I was meant to come back east. And the best advantage of all of that was that I reconnected with Veronica again. So again, by following my intuition and coming back east, things worked out very, very well. And this is something that you will hear me say probably more than once when we get to the question and answer period. Many people will say things like, well, where do you think a safe place to live? Or what would be an appropriate thing to do during this time of transition? And I will always say, follow your own heart. When you feel prompted strongly inside, like I did to go out in the wilderness, or like I did to go to the Pacific Northwest, or like I did to come out east and start sharing my medicine out here, follow that. And when you follow those inner promptings, you will be guided by your flawless inner guidance. Our guidance is never flawed. It is only our perception of whether it's our inner guidance or whether it's fear or a should voice or some other voice in our head. And we have workshops specifically called Trusting Inner Guidance, in which we devote 4 hours to talking in great detail about how to know the difference between the voice of guidance and all those other voices that you sometimes hear. We also do vision quests for people so that we can share this experience of moving through major life transitions. In fact, we have one next weekend down in Baltimore, and I'll talk more about that when we get to the upcoming workshops. One of the other things that we do is we work with people in energy clearing, as we call it. a way of releasing dynamically through Tai Chi, yoga, sound vibration, and breathing a lot of the pent-up energy that we tend to carry around with us. This is one of the more profound ways to clear yourself out, your magnetic energy field, if you will, so that there isn't so much tension and blockage, and you can be more open to the inner guidance that does come through to you. So we do a number of things. This workshop, however, is the one that we like to begin with the people that are new to our work, because the purpose of the Earth Changes workshop is to help people get a clearer perspective of the overall planetary historical perspective. If you understand what's happened in the past and where we are now and where we're headed, what's going on in our immediate current event doesn't seem quite so strange. In fact, let me, I'm going to share with you what we're going to talk about here this evening. I'll just read this off the inside the jacket. The time compaction. How many of you are familiar with this concept of the time warp that we're supposedly in? Okay, just a few of you. We're going to talk about time compaction and what that is. I'm going to share with you a substantial portion of the Hopi Indian prophecies. They are between 10 and 40,000 years old, and they are one of the most accurate prophecies that I'm aware of. And it has a very profound effect, I think, on many people to hear those prophecies, to see how accurate they have been, and to see what they say about the future, and events that we can directly control and modify by the way that we live. Then we will talk about certain parts of the Book of Revelations, in particular this concept of the mark of the beast, the 666, that tends to cause a lot of people to go to fear. It's not the mark of the devil, and it is on everything you buy in the store right now. And ultimately, the intent is to get it in your wrist or forehead, exactly as John said in Revelations. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how you can avoid that if it starts coming your way, and live in a more self-sufficient way from the system if you choose to. And then the final part of the presentation will have to do with this rather unique map that's over here on the right-hand side of what the U.S. is supposed to look like after these Earth changes have changed. And there's an entire scenario of events that leads up to the U.S. looking like you see in that map by the year 2001. The I Am America map is not something we're going to focus on because it is the truth, the light, and the way, but because it is a very accurate reflection of many different prophecies from Nostradamus, Edgar Cayce, some of the visions of the Nez Perce Indian people. The Hopi elders have looked at the map and said, this is accurate. Umbat's men, the Mayan daykeeper shaman, that Jose Arguelles' work, the man who created the harmonic convergence and brought it to our attention, says the map is accurate. Many, many different sources in different places have looked at this and said, yes, this is our vision too. Chet Snow, who was speaking here this weekend, has progressed thousands of people into the future and found that the scenario depicted on the map is the one that most of them see as well. So it's an interesting scenario, and it's not gloom and doom. In fact, there's some really neat things that are going to be happening to this country. That is, if you tend to move inland a little, and we'll talk about that. So at this point, I'd like to take about a half a dozen people who would be willing to briefly share the answer to the question, why are you here at an Earth Changes workshop at the Whole Life Expo?
I'm curious to see what the predictions are and where the safe places to live are. That's why I'm here.
Well, the safe places to live are where you feel drawn in your heart. However, we'll talk about the theoretical safe places, and that may just stimulate your own awareness and sensitivity to where it's appropriate for you to go. Yeah, a couple more? This gal here in the orange?
Oh, me?
Yeah, I can't read your name from here.
Oh, I don't have one.
So that's one?
No, I don't know. 3 years ago, I've been, oh, this sounds strange. I started getting all this inner stuff like through handwriting, and the whole thing keeps, it's guiding me toward shamanism, it's guiding me toward the Southwest. In December, I'm heading out to Santa Fe. I know that I'm going to find someone there that's going to teach me what I need to learn. I know that I have a natural instinct for healing. I came here as an actor, and the whole thing, there's been like a big transition. I'm babbling. It's sort of the same thing that you're going through, but it's like this inner thing, and it's very true. And it's like this whole, I'll shut up now. I don't know, but I just know that I'm going to the Southwest, and I know that I'm going to find somebody out there to teach me what I need
Now,
to.
what you're describing is a situation that almost everyone is in right now. You're farther along because you know where you're going. Most people that I talk to right now, everyone I know is in life transition. Everyone is considering. How many of you are in a life transition right now sometime? Right. This is a time of transition. And actually, this is an excellent time to talk a little bit about the time warp. One of the basic tenets of Earth changes is that over history, when mankind, and forgive the term man, but I'll use it because it's the Hopi's term, when mankind has been placed down on the planet in a Garden of Eden type situation in the original beginning of it all, if you will, that everything was great for thousands of years, and then there was just a few people, kind of like Eve in the garden with her apple, and they got a little out of balance and wanted a little more than their share and started getting into a feeling of separateness from their brothers and sisters, and this continued to become more and more of a problem, and the Great Spirit sent down signs and messages basically saying, if you don't clean up your act and start honoring one another as brothers and sisters, we're going to clean house and start over again. We're not going to put up with this. I'm paraphrasing Hopi, the history of the world. And these warnings were ignored, and the Hopi teaching is that the first world that was seeded by man was purified by a massive fire, and that the ant people took some of the humans down into the earth, and that's how they were able to survive the fire. And they came back up again, the people who remembered the original teachings. This entire scenario, then, they reseeded the second world, everything was wonderful for a certain period of time, and then they started getting out of balance again, the whole thing repeated itself, the omens were ignored, and the world was again purified, this time by ice. And the scientific evidences of the Ice Age correlate with the Hopi mythology about that. This all happened again. The Ice Age people came out and reseeded the planet, and this time the world was purified by water. And according to the Hopi tradition and almost every religious world tradition there is, some type of a craft was constructed out of reeds that floated upon the waters, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. That is not just in the Bible, it's in almost all world mythological traditions. And we're familiar with that particular cleansing. We know it as Noah's Ark. According to the Hopi, we have now entered into a time where once again man has become so out of balance that the earth is being threatened, the signs that are being sent to clean up our act are being ignored, and the earth is about to be purified for the fourth time. This time by a combination of the fire of the first world and the water of the third. Steam, if you will, in a sense. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about in the Hopi prophecy. This concept of earth changes is nothing new. This has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, looking at it from a strictly scientific or geological point of view, we see the same thing. The continents at one time were all in one place together, and over eons they have moved and separated, and you can see if you put the world together, it's like a puzzle. And about every 20,000 years or so, the earth goes through a major boogie. Coastlines change, volcanoes become active, weather patterns change, deserts become tundra, wet areas become deserts, tropical areas become much drier, rainfall shifts, and so on. This is a very normal part of geology on the planet. It happens on a regular cycle. We haven't been around to see the cycles in the past, but we're all living in one now. So what we have is a combination of standard geological changes that take place on a regular sort of a method. This is my reminder here. And a tremendous shifting of spiritual consciousness that's taking place as well. Now, in addition to that, we are ending the Piscean age, which we might liken to an age of darkness and male domination, and moving into the Aquarian age. Now, these are 2,000-year periods. This is a significant time. So we're letting go of all the old patriarchal, dark, dominating type of energy and moving into an age of light, more balanced between male and female, feminine, Aquarian type energy. So you can look at the planets, you can look at the earth, you can look at spiritual evolution and Hopi prophecy and all these other sources, and what it all boils down to is there are going to be some changes around here. And one of the things I say to people is, if you would imagine a scenario of humankind continuing on its present path of war and destruction, environmental degradation and lack of civil rights and rich getting richer and so on, and just foresee that continuing for 20 or 30 years, what would happen? We'd all be dead. So when people sometimes the concept of Earth changes is a little bit intimidating to them. I sometimes say, well, if there aren't some changes on the Earth, we're not going to be here anyway. So the scenario of Earth changes is in fact a cleansing, a purification, and a house cleaning, if you will, that will enable us to return back to an original state of pristine beauty on the planet as far as nature is concerned, and for each of us living more close to the Earth in a simpler, sacred, ancient way, in a tribal sort of a way, where we are connected with one another, like the Indians did, and the Aborigines, and the Kalahari Bushmen. All indigenous tribal cultures lived in that way. So the concept of the time warp specifically within that context is that one of the prophecies, well, all of them practically, say that by the year 2000 or the year 2012, depending on where you look, but somewhere in that 12-year period, we are supposed to move totally into the Aquarian age. The geological changes will end their cycle. Spiritual consciousness will have shifted dramatically, and we will begin living for the first time in quite a while in peace and global harmony and cooperation. We'll have tremendous technological advances. In the Bible, it's called the millennium, a 1,000-year period of unbroken peace and prosperity. Nostradamus calls it the golden age. Most of us call it the new age. That's what we're talking about moving into. There's a small problem. According to the ascended masters, or the angels, or the ETs, or the goddess, or our ancestors, or the Great Spirit, or whatever you want to refer to it as, the various sources that seem to have some relevance that come to us in various ways are saying that we're a little behind on our spiritual evolution. And that if we as a species are going to begin living in peace and cooperation by the year 2000 or 2012, that we have to have a quantum leap in our spiritual consciousness between now and then. If the Earth went through her house cleaning changes like she has in the past in direct proportion to current mass consensual consciousness, there would be very few of us left to see how it turned out. So what is supposedly happening is that our helpers on the other side, with one hand, are holding the Earth back from going through her more radical changes, and with the other hand, they are simultaneously revving up our spiritual growth. The theory is that we are about 10 lifetimes behind in our spiritual evolution as a species. Now that doesn't mean that Wade is or that Donna is, but as a species we're 10 lifetimes behind. And so we need to go through the equivalent of 10 lifetimes of spiritual growth or personal evolution in the next 10 to 20 years. Another way to quantify that, to make it a little more comprehensible, is that we're going through the equivalent of, in the past, a lifetime of spiritual growth every year in our current lives. Or to bring it down even further, we're going through the equivalent of 5 years of spiritual growth every month. Now, I often ask people to stop and think about the changes and the transformations and the shifts and the healing and the radical reorientation in their life in the last 12 months, starting, let's say, from 1990 up till about now. Think about, go back 1 year ago in your life, plot yourself, rewind your video, where you were, who you were in relationship with, what you were doing, what was going on at work, and so on, your state of consciousness, and bring yourself slowly forward last fall through the holidays and the winter time, last spring, and then the summer, and then the fall, and then right up till now. It's almost November now. And compare what has happened in your life during that 12-month period that you just rewound your video on with the previous 10 years. And tell me which of those two periods, the last year or the previous 10, you've had more spiritual growth in. What would you say? Almost everyone would say the last year. So this little phenomena of the time warp or of time compaction helps explain a lot of things that otherwise would make absolutely no sense. Why have we been going through all the things we've been going through in our lives? Now, one of the very valuable things about this concept of time compaction to be aware of is that if 5 years worth of growth is being squeezed into a month now, then we have an almost instant thought manifestation, or an instant mirroring back from the universe. There is no delay like there used to be. What you focus on tends to become your reality almost like that. And you may notice that things you think about happen almost instantaneously. Something that would take a month takes a week. Something that would take a day happens an hour later. Other things are like you think, and it's there. This is a time of instant thought manifestation. If you're thinking negatively, then it's not much fun, because the universe will tend to beat you over the head with a lot of 2x4s. And if you are out of harmony with your original soul purpose, if you are not following your heart, if you are not self-actualizing and manifesting what you're here to do, you will know it, because your life will be filled with struggle and difficulty and effort and hardship, and things will not flow. In the Oriental tradition, we would say you are not in the Tao. When things are flowing and they're going smoothly and you're being supported by unforeseen events and meetings and circumstances and there's miraculous stuff going on in your life, then you know that you are on the path and that you are, in the Oriental tradition, in the flow of the Tao. Real basic feedback. So there are times when things are great and maybe the next day they're not. Whenever that happens, when you hit those walls, do not persist until you succeed, like Augmandino says. That's not good advice. That's the old Piscean dominating get over the wall mentality. When you hit the wall, stop and go, a wall. Maybe I should take another route. Or maybe I could take another route, which would be a more empowering way to say that. So when things are not flowing well, that is an indication that it is time to stop and assess the direction you're going and the methodology you're choosing to achieve your purpose. And consider going within and asking for some guidance at that point. And you will find almost always that there will be a sort of a new direction given to you to start pursuing. If you're stressed out, if you don't feel good, if you're unhappy, it's not because you're a bad person. It's not because you're not evolving spiritually. It's because you're not following your soul purpose. You're not on your path of power, as Sun Bear would say. So that's the concept of time compaction. And it may help you, I hope, as it has me, to really understand and respond to the challenges in my life in a much more powerful way, thinking of it in those terms. The other thing I would say about time compaction is the Hopi say it's a tremendous honor to be alive during this time in history, and that it takes the agreement of 9 ancestors before conception can even occur in this plane, and that all of you would apparently have a pretty high clearance to be here now, and that you are spiritual warriors to even be alive during this time of tremendous spiritual growth. Who would want to sign up for the idea of going down to go through 10 lifetimes worth of growth in 1 decade? And whatever's happened in your life up until 1990 has prepared you for this home stretch, this final decade before we move into the millennium. And whatever you and everybody else on this planet need to do to be prepared to live in that way will happen between now and 2004, 2012, depending. That's close enough. Within a 12-year period after thousands of years is pretty close. And with that, I think I'd like to go ahead and begin sharing with you a little bit of the Hopi prophecy. The first thing that I say before I share the Hopi prophecy is that if I really shared it, it would take 4 days. And we will just share excerpts that will give you a feeling or a sense for the Native American. As we go through this, listen to the metaphors and the analogies that are used as we go along. The things that were prophesied by the Hopi elders 10,000 years ago didn't exist. So they described them in ways that a Native American person would understand them. That's an important thing to understand as we go along. The other thing that I want to say is that I have not been initiated or approved by the Hopi elders in any way to share this prophecy. And it's only recently in the cycles of time that this has even been shared with non-native people. But the Hopis felt, for a number of reasons that will become obvious as we move through their prophecy, that it was important to begin sharing this information. And so I am in no way worthy of sharing this with you, and it is a great honor for me to do this. And in fact, before we begin, I'd like to suggest that those of you who still have your shoes on, I'd like to invite you to take them off. You'll be much more comfortable. This is very strong medicine, as the Indians say. And I invite you to take a few deep breaths and just move more inward. Release on all the external stimuli that's just come in, and move somewhat inside at this point. And ask that your higher power be with you at this time, to help you discern the difference between the truth for you and irrelevant information that you may hear the rest of this evening. I encourage you not to believe anything that I present, but just to see how it resonates in your own inner sense, and whether it's relevant or in some way valuable for you. And as you listen to the Hopi prophecy, the book of Revelations material, and this map, the I Am America map, check in and ask, is this true? Is this right? So that when you leave here this evening, you will leave here with a greatly awakened memory of your particular soul purpose during this time. And you would not be at an Earth Changes seminar right now at the Whole Life Expo unless you were a very high degree of spiritual warrior. Most people don't want to hear about this, much less come to a seminar and look at it in depth. So you are here because your soul has prompted you to look squarely in the eye of what is prophesied to be forthcoming. And with the knowledge and the understanding of it, you have the ability to respond to it in the way of the warrior, and to be in your power, and to move through it, and to help others as well. The Hopis say that in the beginning of the cycles of time, the Great Spirit made an appearance, gathering all of the peoples of the earth together on an island that is now beneath the water. The Great Spirit said, I am going to send you to 4 directions, and over time I will change you to 4 colors, and I'm going to give you some teachings, and you will call these the original teachings. And when you come back together again, you will share these teachings, so that peace will reign on earth, and a great civilization will come about. And a sacred handshake was given to each of the 4 colors of people before they left, so that when they reunited, they would know that they had remembered the teachings. The Hopis were told that the first brothers and sisters that would come back to them would come back as turtles across the land. They built a special village to welcome their honored guests, and at the dawn of the day, they looked out across the Hopi Mesa, and they saw the Spanish conquistadors moving toward them, dressed in full armor, looking to them as turtles coming across the land. They were exalted. They went down onto the plain. They approached the conquistadors, extended their hand for the sacred handshake, and the conquistadors dropped a trinket into it. And the Hopis knew that there would not be peace on earth, because some of the brothers and sisters had forgotten the original teachings. And word spread throughout the Native American culture that there was going to be a hard time ahead. Tribes began sending people to the mountains to have visions of what they could do. I'm going to be jumping ahead in time. The Hopi elders spoke of a black ribbon that would be built across this land. They said that if this ribbon, this ribbon would carry people back and forth across Turtle Island, North America. They said that if these ribbons were built in such a way that they went from north to south, that there would be a peace on earth. They said that if these ribbons went from east to west, that there would be difficulty and increasing problems for the peoples of the earth. They said that there would be a bug that would move across these black ribbons, and that when this bug began moving across the black ribbons, and by the time that all 4 races and all 4 colors had traveled clear across this land on these ribbons, that if by that time the people had not come together as brothers and sisters, that the Great Spirit would take the earth with his hand and shake it to remind them. Who has an idea what the black ribbons are that we're talking about?
Highways.
The highways. And the bug?
Cars.
In this case, specifically the Model T Ford. In 1908, the Model T Ford was developed, and shortly thereafter, we had the first shaking of the earth, which we call World War I. The Hopis were told that after the first shaking of the earth, that there would be an attempt made for peace on the west coast of this land. And when they heard about the League of Nations, they petitioned President Woodrow Wilson to attend and represent the Red Nation, because they knew that until the black, the yellow, the white, and the red, all 4 colors sat together in the same circle, there could not be a peace on earth. And President Wilson didn't even respond to their request. He ignored it, and they were left out of the League of Nations. And the Hopi elders knew that there would not be a peace on earth, and that in fact things would speed up, and that things would worsen, because people were more out of balance. And they were again given signs before the second shaking of the earth, which they said would be greater than the first. They said that there would be a cobweb built across this land, and that people would talk back and forth across these cobwebs. They called them cobwebs in the sky, or talking cobwebs. Do we know what they're talking about here? The telephone transmission lines. They said that there would be a sign of life appear in the east, but it would tilt and bring death, and that the sun would rise, not in the east, but in the west. And when you see the sign of life in the east tilting, and the symbol of the sun rising in the west, and you see those two signs together, you will know that the second shaking of the earth is about to occur. Now, who knows what those signs are? Excellent guess. If you're not familiar with Hopi culture, you probably don't know that the Hopi sign of life looks a bit like this. This is a Kachina rattle, and this is the Hopi sign of life. It is in no way exclusive to the Hopis. In fact, a variation of it that we'll show you in a second was used by the Greeks in the Greek mystery schools to represent the sun, or the sign of life. This is the Hopi sign of life. So if it were tilted, it would look something like this. It's also shown this way as well. What Hitler did was he took the sign of life from Greek times, and that the Hopis and other cultures have used, and he tilted it as a symbol of the Third Reich. Now do we know what the sign of life? What is the sun rising in the west? Yeah. The Japanese flag. The flag of Japan. It's the rising sun. Sometimes you'll see it like this, sometimes with rays on it. Either way, it indicates a sun rising. So if you are standing in North America, then Germany is to your east with the sign of life tilted, Japan is to the west with the sun rising. And the Hopi said, when you see those two signs together, you will know that the great death is about to come. And they said that in the second shaking of the earth, there would be the worst misuse of fire in the history of the planet Earth. They said that the white man would develop a gourd of ashes, and they would drop this gourd of ashes from the sky, and that where it hit, that people would be as blades of grass in a prairie fire, and nothing would grow for many seasons. Do we know what they're talking about? Probably have never taken a gourd of ashes and thrown it up in the sky and let it hit, but this is what it looks like. The gourd of ashes will fall from the sky. It will make people as blades of grass in a prairie fire. This is Nagasaki. And nothing will grow there for many seasons. When the gourd of ashes fell from the sky, the Hopi elders knew that there would be another attempt made for peace, this time on the east coast of this land. They were told that a great house of mica would be built on the eastern shore of Turtle Island. Now, mica is a stone in the desert. When the sun shines on it, it looks like a mirror. A great house of mica on the eastern shore where the peoples of the earth would gather together.
United Nations.
The United Nations building. When they saw the United Nations being built and it was completed and ready to begin, they didn't even call and ask. They felt that time was moving so fast now and things were very urgent. They left Hopi land and they went directly to the United Nations building. On the day that it opened, they were on the steps, and they said, "We represent the indigenous peoples of North America, and we wish to address the nations of the earth. And we will give you 4 days to consider our request." And they retreated to the Six Nations Indian Reserve here in New York State and waited. And the answer came back that the nations of the earth would like to hear what the Hopi had to say. And if they had been allowed to speak at the United Nations, there would have been a circle with all 4 races and colors and the possibility of world peace. But they were vetoed. There were 5 nations at that time that had veto power in the UN. Guess which one vetoed their appearance?
America.
Excellent guess. The United States. the United States. Their prophecy said that they would not be admitted to the UN, and in fact they held true. Now, after the second shaking of the earth, they were given further signs. In fact, I will read some of those to you. The elders share that you will begin to see changes upon the earth. This was after World War II, and after the UN. They knew the UN would never bring peace to the earth. That time will go faster and faster. Parents won't have time for their children. Children won't have time for their grandparents, as families become more and more separated. The elders say, as things speed up, you should slow down. Now that's some of the best advice I've ever heard. And this expo is one of the best examples of life in the spiritual fast lane. As things speed up, you should slow down. Because the earth is going to be shaken a third time. The Great Spirit has shaken the earth 2 times, the First and Second World Wars, to remind us to come together as a human family. We had a chance to do this, but we missed it. And now we see signs of the coming of the third shaking of the earth. They describe this third shaking of the earth pretty specifically. They say that at the time of the third shaking of the earth, that there will be villages of stone so great that you will be unable to see out. And people will live in these villages of stone. You have an idea what they mean by that? Villages of stone.
New York City?
New York City is one of the biggest villages of stone there is. Look around. Brick, concrete, this whole village is made of stone. Now the concept to a Hopi to not be able to see out across the mesas is very strange. But in New York, of course, you can only see a block away. Villages of stone so great that you will be unable to see out. And they say that there will come a time that those who drop the gourd of ashes from the sky, upon them it will drop. And they say in the morning these villages of stone will be there, but by evening they will be turned to steam. And there will be people in these villages who will turn to steam also, because they did not have the spiritual eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now they have given some signs that will precede this and some advice on how we can prevent it. There are 2 primary signs that have been given before what's being called the third shaking of the earth. And the first of these is that the mark of the bear will be on all the goods that men buy or sell during the final days of the purification. The Hopis call this the Great Purification. They don't call it the end of the world. It's the Great Purification, the cleansing. A bear marks its territory by standing up as high as it can and scratching its claws into a tree. And they say the mark of the bear will be on all the goods that men buy or sell. The other prophecy, which is particularly relevant to us at this point, is that they say the final sign before the third shaking of the earth is that a house will be built and thrown into the sky. And that when people are living in the house, in the sky, on a permanent basis, the time of the third shaking of the earth will be near. Skylab. Interesting. Let's move ahead here a little bit. One of the interesting things about the Hopi prophecy is that they predicted that the eagle would land on the moon. And the Cherokees have a prophecy about that as well. An interesting thing about prophecy and what actually happens in the earth is, in this case, we're talking about a house in the sky. Now this is a shot of the Space Shuttle Challenger blowing up. When men landed on the moon, things were going extremely well for NASA. There was a few mishaps here and there, but the space program was doing very, very well. And what's happened here since '86, you may have noticed that things have taken a turn for the worse. It's very interesting in that sense. What about the Hubble telescope? A grand success, certainly. $1.5 billion to send something up there that won't work. Now, the way to fix it, of course, they couldn't get their remote, so they need to send up a space shuttle. Here's a copy of the Long Island Newsday newspaper from June 30th of this year, indicating that all 3 space shuttles were grounded for various reasons. And you remember the little space shuttle that they kept trying to put up, and it's going to be up Thursday, and it'll be up Wednesday, and it'll be up next week, and that went on and on and on. They finally did get the Ulysses probe up. But the space program has just been plagued with problems and difficulty. Remember how I talked about being in the flow of the Tao? NASA is out of the Tao right now. And to me, this is a very, very significant thing. Because the mark of the bear is definitely on the goods, and we'll talk about that. But this, the final sign given, the house in the sky, people living there permanently, has not come to pass. And one of the things that the Hopi elders say is that by sharing the original teachings, and by coming together as brothers and sisters, and living as a human family, that we can greatly cushion the third shaking of the earth and all of the prophesied earth changes. This, to me, is a very clear indication that there has been a shift in human consciousness and that we have been returning to the original teachings. Just about everybody here this weekend has done that, or they wouldn't be at the Whole Life Expo. And that this is having an effect in a very direct way on the space program. It's just not working. In fact, there are congressmen and senators now who are talking about just mothballing the whole Skylab project because they say it's costing billions of dollars and it's not getting us anywhere. And they're suggesting that the money could be better spent on other projects. So the program is in jeopardy right now. A very fascinating thing to consider. And again, this is the final sign that was given before the third shaking of the earth. The elders say we may not be able to stop all of these events, but by sharing the teaching that will reunite us, we can cushion it. They say each of us carries a sacred drop of light within us, and that the heart and mind is going to be opened up to the radiance of our own soul during this time, and that something so good is going to happen upon this earth that it cannot even be described. Now, those are strong words. The heart and mind will be open to the radiance of our own soul, and something so good will happen upon the earth that it cannot even be described. It is said that it is a great honor to live during this time of change, this cycle of purification. It is also the hardest time, but it is a great honor to be alive to see this. It is a very difficult time to live now. And again, I would assert that none of you are here, especially on the spiritual path, unless you knew this job was dangerous when you took it, and you came down here to be a spiritual warrior during this time. Arise now and awake, it is a new day dawning. Those are the final words from the Hopi prophecy, and a phrase from the Dhammapada of Buddha. The Hopis and the Tibetans are intimately linked together. The ultimate Hopi prophecy is a bit of a mind stretcher. Willie Whitefeather told me that after we move through the cycle of purification and we begin living in peace and harmony for 1,000 unbroken years, maybe longer, that our spiritual and technological consciousness will rise to such an extent that we will be able to fulfill the soul destiny of the earth, which according to the Cherokee, Salagi, Hopi, is that we will be able to break the earth, atmosphere and all, out of its orbit around the sun and move out into space with the earth as a starship, exploring strange new worlds, new life, and new civilizations, and boldly going where no one has gone before. I just made that up. No, that's from Star Trek. But actually, that's the Hopi prophecy. Spaceship Earth. In the Course in Miracles, they keep referring to the Earth as the sunship. Interesting inference. So that'll stretch your brain a little bit. The ultimate prophecy of the Hopis is that the Earth will become a spaceship, and we will travel interplanetarily as ambassadors of goodwill and higher knowledge. I think we got a little work to do before we're ready for that job. Let's talk about this other Hopi prophecy. The Hopi said that the mark of the bear would be on all the goods that men bought or sold during the final days of the purification. This is the way a bear marked his territory. And the way that Willie drew out his drawing, he's got two little rabbits here looking at some beer cans with the UPC codes on them, and it says, "Look, Mama, he even marked the cans." Fascinating prophecy. One of the things I look for in my research is correlations between prophecies which have good track records. This is the mark of the bear, according to the Hopi, according to Willie Whitefeather, and that's my imagination about it. A standard universal product code. How many of you have ever stared intently at a UPC code? More than usual here. Got some weird people in the room. Well, a UPC code is a fascinating study. What we have here are 10 digits, 5 on the left, 5 on the right. Each one of these digits has a magnetically encoded computer strip above it, which to the scanning machine at the supermarket tells the computer what that number is. There are some lines here that do not have numbers underneath them. There's one on the far left, one in the center, and one on the extreme right. Now, these code numbers here to the computer do not have numbers, and they are always on every UPC code. We'll highlight them here for those of you who are close enough to see that. The far left, the center, and the far right. Now, if you study enough UPC codes, you'll find one that probably has a 6 on it, and you'll be able to see that the UPC symbol for a 6 is what we have here. Or, to make it more simple, we'll cover up all the other numbers. These other numbers constantly change, depending on the product. These are on every UPC you will see, except for the little mini ones on books. What we have here is what? We have a 666. Now, it doesn't say that on the UPC code, but when you flip it at Safeway, the computer reads every single product you buy as the 10 digits within a 666. So it's a computer magnetic encode here. Now, the 666 is referred to as the number of the beast. And we will assert at this point that the beast is not Satan, that he doesn't have a whole lot to do with these UPC codes as far as we can tell. However, I would like to share with you a real interesting article that came out of Windward's magazine in February of '88. This is Ramtha's magazine. Some of you may know of him. There are some question about various channeled entities' authenticity at various times, but again, I pay very little attention to the source of information and a lot of attention to whether it correlates with other information and how it feels in my gut. That's what I go by. Here's what it says here. Australian citizens spent most of 1987 fighting against legislation that would establish the Australian card, an identification card that would assign each citizen a number and computerize Medicare, Social Security, and taxation. Opponents of the card claimed that the government had a sinister secret strategy to extend use of the proposed card after its introduction. The Victorian Council for Civil Liberties said, various other people and organizations may request your card. Your doctor, your local shopkeeper, a credit agency, the police, a local cinema, anyone. This only outlines the uses prescribed and allowed by the legislation. If the card ever becomes a universal identifier, you may as well tape it to your forehead. Close quote. Biblical authorities believe that it will come to that, only worse. They point out that in Revelations, John speaks of a mark not on, but in the forehead or the palm. The actual translation from John is the mark is in the forehead or the palm. Several sources claim that a hand scan or palm print machine is already being manufactured in Holland, Japan, and New York City. In 1973, this was 10 years before this information came about. Well, actually, let me go back to this first. I'll tell you about Mary Stuart Ralph. She wrote a book called When the Money Fails, about the impending economic collapse, and we'll get to that. She says that in 1980, the IRS printed a trial run of checks meant to be issued in 1984, and 25 were mailed accidentally. The recipients were startled to read on the backs of the checks, quote, "Do not cash this check unless the recipient has a number either on his right hand or his forehead," unquote. She reported a similar incident where Social Security checks were mailed in 1980 with instructions to cash them only if the bearer had a proper identification mark on the right hand of the forehead. When banks refused to cash the checks, the IRS issued a statement saying, quote, "These government checks requiring a mark are not to be put into use until 1984, unquote. So the ominous year chosen by George Orwell and the IRS passed without incident, but the debit card plan was only postponed, not canceled. In 1973, 10 years before any of this came about, an issue of Senior Scholastics, an educational magazine for high school students, had a front cover drawing of use of different races with numbers tattooed on their foreheads. The accompanying article described the cashless society of the future. Quote, "All buying and selling will be done by computer. No currency, no change, no checks." In the program, people would receive a number that had been assigned them tattooed in their wrist or forehead. The number is put on by a laser beam and cannot be felt. The number in the body is not seen with the naked eye and is as permanent as your fingerprints. All items of consumer goods will be marked with computer marks. The computer outlet in the store, which picks up the number on the items at the check stand, will also pick up the number in the person's body and automatically deduct the total from the person's account. Ramtha has told us that the beast John refers to in Revelations is not Satan, but a supercomputer, which holds the records of every person in the world. Now, in Belgium, at NATO World Headquarters, there is a computer that a man has been to and shared with me personally that is connected with all other computers in the world and apparently has all the records of everyone in the world accessible to it. And those individuals that work there at NATO World Headquarters affectionately refer to this immense computer as the Beast. They call it the Beast. What you earn will be credited to your account. What you spend will be recorded. The computer will know what you buy, where you live, where you travel to, how much you pay in taxes. In short, it will know everything about you. Now, it might not matter that the gray men, as Ramtha calls them, are aware of your penchant for gingerbread, but if they can scan the items you buy in the grocery store, they can also scan the drugs you buy from the drugstore, the gold and silver you buy at the coin shop, the weapons you buy at the gun shop. And they will know everything about you, everywhere you go. Now, let's go back to the Bible. One of the most intriguing passages and most quoted in the Bible is in Revelations 14. John says, "If anyone worships the beast and its image, and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he shall drink the wine of God's wrath poured unmixed into the cup of his anger," which does not sound like much fun. "They shall have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast and its image, and whosoever receives the mark of his name." And perhaps the biggest challenge of all is the advice to become totally self-sufficient. In my opinion, when they introduce the debit card, which is already being used to an extent in Canada as well as in France right now, they will get everyone to start using the card, and then ultimately they will say, let's do away with the card and just put the computer chip inside the wrist of the forehead. That way no one can take your card, or you won't have to worry about losing it and being bankrupted by somebody who whoops your account out. Makes sense? When that happens, there will be a substantial number of people, though probably in no means the majority, who will choose not to take that mark. The LDS church members will certainly not take it. Neither will the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which are doing workshops all around the country right now for free, sharing this information with people. They are not likening it to the computer codes, but they're talking about it in another sense. When that happens, many people are going to choose to live outside of the structured world. If you don't have your debit card or your mark, you will not be able to get utilities. You won't be able to get your paycheck or get your taxes paid or put gas in your car or any of that. You will need to separate yourself completely and totally from the structured world and live in total self-sufficiency, obviously away from the city, somewhere out in the country. probably with other people, though you may do it alone. You will need to have your own water source, electric power if you choose to have that, food, clothing, shelter, and so on. Complete self-sufficiency. Simply put, you need to live the way people have lived for thousands of years before cities ever existed, like the Indians. It may seem like a strange idea, but actually piling ourselves up one on top of another hundreds and hundreds of feet high on little tiny islands like this one seems like a rather strange thing to the Indians. And they can just spread themselves out and enjoy the gifts of the Earth Mother. So this will happen, in my opinion. And any steps that can be taken now towards self-sufficiency are wise steps to take. And for those of you who may think this is a little far out and stretching the brain a little bit, let me quote to you some of the more current events. Bill Cooper mentioned this in his workshop earlier today. There's been a state law passed in the state of Oklahoma, House Bill 1750. I'd like to share with you what that law says. As of January 1st, 1991, in Oklahoma, House Bill 1750 requires all Oklahoma residents to declare everything they own to the tax collector. Everything means exactly that. Coins, art collections, furniture, guns, business equipment, bank accounts, household furniture, everything. Whether your dwelling be rented or owned makes no difference, even if you live in an apartment. Any taxpayer who refuses to fill out the form and submit it to the assessor by March 15th will be visited by an assessor. He will first ask permission to enter the home or place of business. If the request is denied, he will be issued a search warrant. Any property not previously listed or undervalued will be assessed a penalty of up to 20% of its market value. Now, I thought we founded this country so we could have justice and liberty. Remember the Boston Tea Party? Why did that happen? Because of taxes. Oklahoma law 1750. You have to declare everything you own to the tax assessor, and if you don't, they will kick your door in and see what you've got. That is state law right now, and it's a test case. If people allow that to happen, it will move from there through the rest of the U.S. Oklahoma is an interesting place. Do you know you can be thrown in jail in Oklahoma for practicing astrology or hypnosis right now? It is illegal to practice astrology in the state of Oklahoma. These things are happening now. We are beginning to see the very beginning. Now, the theory is it's going to become a lot more radical starting around 1992. Not only in the sense of the things I'm describing now, but also in geographical, geological terms as well. It may or it may not. I don't pretend to know. But what I feel is valuable is to be able to share with you these prophecies that coincide and correlate with one another, and let you decide in your own cellular level if it's meaningful to you.
This is Matthew John Stenger with an interesting update on the economy. This article in the September 24th Time magazine states, quote, "The failure of a single major bank could wipe out the FDIC's insurance fund, which has only $12 billion on hand to cover the $2 trillion in insured deposits. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that some 630 banks will fail over the next 3 years," unquote. And in this article, in the November 11th Baltimore Sun, a financial analyst is quoted as saying, "Insurance companies are victims of the same things that got savings and loans and banks." I am reminded of the words of the Channel Tuella, who says, "The world economic nightmare of this day shall have no place in the golden age to come." If the economy as we know it collapses, and the prophecies indicate that it will, what are we to do? The advice from nearly every source is the same. 1. Store food. 2 years' worth for yourself and your family. 2. Buy gold and silver. They have held their value in every economy. 3. Move outside the cities. They will be the most dangerous places during economic or geological earth changes. And 4, buy land in the country that you can grow food on and purchase tools and equipment that you can use there without electricity. Consider how you and your family could take steps toward greater economic self-sufficiency. as we now rejoin the live presentation of a map of the United States of the future.
Some of you may recognize this gentleman, Saint Germain. The source of this map, the I Am America map, was the Ascended Masters, primarily Saint Germain, in channeled sessions through a woman named Lori Wilkins, who lives in Lewiston, Idaho. And through a series of divine disorder, I came into contact with her and was there on the evening when she and Doug Scheffler, who also created the map with her, first presented it to a tiny little metaphysical group in Lewiston, Idaho of about 15 people. And when I saw this map and what they had done with it, I said, you've got to come to Spokane and share this. And they weren't too sure they wanted to do that. But through a series of events, we finally convinced them to do it. And ultimately, the things kept moving and going, and finally Doug and Lori collaborated together. They both worked in the advertising business and created this map. Again, I personally don't pay a lot of attention to the source of the information. I just look for where it correlates with other reputable information and how it strikes me in the gut. I encourage you to do the same thing. Saint Germain told Lori when he gave her this information that the information would only be about the United States and not the rest of the world. Now, since that time, more information has come in. But he said that the United States is the chosen race. That, in fact, he gave her a new flag, and it says, I am America. And he said this is a decree or an affirmation. I am the I am race. These 5 stars represent the 5 vortex areas, or golden cities as they're called on the map, and we'll give you a tour through those. And they represent the 50 states, a portion of which will all remain. The affirmation, I am America, simply means that we are the I am race, the chosen race. And Saint Germain said that we are the torchbearers, and that we will move into the changes first, and that we will go through them, and we will guide the rest of the world through the time of changes. This is the original map that Doug and Lori began working with. A map of the U.S. which they covered with plastic and began working with little markers. It's not as sophisticated as the final product. However, it's a real good one to use to understand more intimately this process. Where you now see a blue highlighting indicates water. This is all a bay up here in the Pacific Northwest. Where you see blue here is also water, most of the southwestern United States. By referencing the map on the wall, you can get a clearer idea of what I mean. The blue in this area where Dallas is a huge bay. Again, you can see that on the wall more clearly. And up here, the Great Lakes become a single lake, which the Masters renamed Unity Lake. The tip of Florida is underwater, consistent with every earth change prophecy that I'm familiar with, and most of Maine ends up underwater. And New York has some interesting things happen as well. So this was the original map that they began working with. It was later printed out in this way. Doug Scheffler created a 3-dimensional model of the map, and then they overlaid all the type over the top of it and came up with the finished product here. Now, I will not have time to go through everything on the map in detail. However, there's also a bit of a magazine on this map explaining the entire scenario of events in great detail and bringing in a bunch of additional information that we won't have time to go into. So it's the gift for the man who has everything. If you can't think of what to get somebody, get them a map of upcoming earth change. Now, you guys are laughing, but I have found that this map is an interesting phenomenon. There are some people who will be in the presence of this map and just say that they can feel the high vibration coming off it, and they're just entranced with it. Other people, like a bookstore owner of a metaphysical bookstore in Spokane, Washington, said, get that out of my store. I don't want that in here. And this has happened over and over and over. And some of you in this room may feel a significant amount of fear in your gut when you look at this map. Other people feel very exalted, like it came through from an ascended source or something. I've come to the conclusion that it couldn't be the map. It must just be that this map is a mirror. And it will show you where you're at in your relationship to fear. And when you're talking about earth changes, fear is something that commonly comes up. And Kuthumi, one of the Ascended Masters that worked with Lori on this, said something very profound. He said, when you are feeling fear, just remember that that's a sign that you are out of touch with your power. True? If you are a spiritual warrior and you are feeling fear associated with any decision, circumstance, or situation in your life, just stop and go, wait a minute, I'm out of touch with my power. A common phenomena in most earth change prophecy is that there will be plenty of warning before any heavy-duty cataclysmic event. However, I would quote the Hopi and say that it will only be seen by those with the spiritual eyes to see and the ears to hear. People who are living in closed-off lives where all they focus on is the rat race will not probably see the signs. She was told that before the first major event that would create the scenario of changes that we're going to describe, that there would be a meteor shower that would be visible all over the earth. Red, in fact. This is consistent with many other prophecies that I'm aware of. And that when you see this meteor shower all over the earth, you will know that it's a good time to stay out of the southern Nevada desert, because one meteor is supposed to make it through and strike the Nevada desert. Right about here. So somewhere in that same basic area is where a meteor is supposed to strike. This meteor will trigger a series of quakes in the southwest, which will cause it to drop in elevation substantially. It will also trigger, according to this information, the activity of the little ring of fire up in the Pacific Northwest. Various volcanoes up there, Mount Baker, Mount Adams, Mount St. Helens is one you're more familiar with, and Mount Rainier, which is an extinct Ha-Ha volcano. Another Hopi prophecy, by the way, says that when the little sister speaks, the grandfather will answer. And what they're talking about is Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier. Living at the foot of Mount Rainier would not probably be my first choice, given that Hopi prophecy. When the meteor hits, triggers the quakes, and the volcanic activity is stimulated, there will be a tremendous amount of meteorite dust and volcanic ash in the atmosphere, which will cover the globe. And Saint Germain said this would be one of the primary stimulants for a very profound and thorough cleansing of the earth in the form of rain, the water of the fire and water, if you will. And that there would be this misting rain for almost 2 years, not non-stop, but kind of like Seattle in the wintertime, you know, when you put your windshield wipers on mist. It would just continue to rain. And that you'll notice that the rivers are very swollen, the Gulf of Mexico is huge, and so on. There'd be a tremendous rainfall. It would erode the mountains, cause the ocean water levels to rise. Now, with a dust cloud around the atmosphere, you have an intensification of the already intense greenhouse effect. The sun's rays penetrate through the smoke, but yet are maintained in an insulated form between the smoke or the clouds and the earth, causing an increase in global warming. Now, there's already a hole in the ozone layer the size of Antarctica that's permitting a lot of radiation and heat to come through, and the South Pole is melting at a very rapid rate. This will accelerate that, and both poles will melt more rapidly, causing the ocean water levels to rise. If you've ever had a glass of ice water and watched the ice melt, you see the water come up. This is what will happen. As the water starts moving in on the west coast, it will place more and more weight upon the land and ultimately trigger a series of long overdue quakes, which will cause California to drop down into the ocean, leaving only this portion here. Now again, this is a projection, it is a scenario. It is not the truth of light and the way, but it's pretty consistent with most of the other earth change prophecies that have a good track record. Once that happens, it will create the Bay of Harmony. Let me give you the outlines of that bay. It will go from San Diego up to Phoenix, Arizona, up here near Denver, and up to Salt Lake City, and along this bridge of land here ending up at Mount Shasta. An immense, monstrous bay. And the masters just indicated that this area of the United States, there has been a tremendous amount of abuse to the natural energy. Nevada in particular is the site of untold nuclear testing, nuclear waste, and nuclear you name it, as well as in California. And apparently some things have been going on here too, where there's a need for profound cleansing. This entire area will be cleansed by being turned into a huge bay. Now they call it the Bay of Harmony. And they said that when this water comes in and settles here, that it will create one of the most harmonic and healing spots on the planet Earth. And so if you're sitting in Salt Lake City, Denver, or Phoenix, you may be able to look out to the west and see something similar to this. And the master said people would travel from all over the globe just to stay along the coastline here in this Bay of Harmony and feel these tranquil, healing energies that would exist there. Gloom and doom? I think it's a vast improvement over what we have now in Nevada. It's up to you to decide. The Salt Lake City area will become a series of islands. Here's Ogden and Provo. Down here is San Diego and a more close-up of Phoenix. Now, this gold cross that you see here represents one of the golden cities, which are said to be safe, protected areas, and they are huge. They're about 350 miles across. We will go through each one of those in detail. The coastline runs up here to Denver, and we see this bridge of land extending out here in the center. Now, up in the Pacific Northwest, as we move up the map, there is a quake area indicated here by a diamond. Look at it more closely in this slide. From Portland, Oregon, up here to Ellensburg, La Grande, and down near Bend, Oregon. Lori was told by the masters that about 3 years after the California quake, that there would be a 12.5 quake in this area that basically would just atomize that whole place, cause it to drop into elevation, and so forth. Meaning that Seattle would be underwater, Tacoma and Everett are here. The Olympic National Park, most of it remains, as does Mount Olympus. Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Mount Adams, Mount St. Helen, all the volcanoes are still there, and the lower half of Vancouver Island. Port Townsend and the San Juans, which are supposed to be safe, protected places during the time of changes, will be underwater. Now that points up an interesting thing. Maybe they will be, and this projection is inaccurate. Maybe they won't be, and all those people who are there thinking it's safe have something else coming. All this does, once again, is prove that all there is to do is trust your own inner sense of where to go and when to go there and what to do and who to do it with and how to do it. No map, no prophecy, no projection, no advice from a friend is going to be what you want to follow. Follow your own gut feeling. You will be drawn to where you need to be, when you need to be there. And you will do the work you need to do with whom you need to do it, when you need to do it. And there are a number of you in the room I've talked to that are already considering moving out of this area and pursuing your lifestyles elsewhere. It's a good idea, and we'll talk about why when we get there. The coastline will move up here into Canada, as we see here. And I'm going to back up now and talk to you about this land bridge here. This land bridge will extend out. This is the Idaho-Nevada border coming across here into Oregon and Nevada, and right out to this place here where Mount Shasta is located. So Mount Shasta, according to this scenario, will remain, and the master said that people will make pilgrimages and travel back and forth across this land bridge to go to Mount Shasta, which will become, as it is now, a major source of earth healing energy. These are called the Pathway Islands and will be said to exist from Mount Shasta down to this bridge here, which includes South Lake Tahoe and Yosemite National Park. So they saved some really neat places, huh? And that's the way that is supposed to go. So Mount Shasta will remain during the time of change and continue to do all the interesting things that it's already known for doing. This is an aerial map, and the reason I show it is because there's an indication here that Spokane is destroyed. I'm going to use Spokane, which is where I'm from, as an example of the concept of the Earth Mother cleansing herself. The places that have the greatest threat to the survival of humanity and to the health and well-being of the planet are the ones that will be the most thoroughly purified. Spokane, Washington is the best example of that in this country that I know of. Having lived there, Spokane is an interesting place. Fairchild Air Force Base is there. You will watch B-52 bombers circle Spokane every hour. It happens so often you don't even notice it anymore. There is an untold amount of nuclear weapons stored there in various ways. And they have just recently decided to build an incinerator and burn the trash for about 5 surrounding counties in Spokane. Great idea. The most recent brilliant idea in Spokane has been to bring the MX missile there, the Peacekeeper missiles, which will be around on railroad cars. Really brilliant if you know anything about defensive strategy. A major contract for some defense suppliers, certainly. But Spokane is one of the most dangerous places on the planet to the wealth, yeah, for sure, the health and welfare of this earth. And Lori Wilkins saw in a vision where she was projecting herself into the future that Spokane was sand, completely leveled. Now, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is indicated by this X here in the words transportation hub, is untouched. Spokane, completely destroyed. This is the safe protected area here, these gold lines, so if we make it like a clock and we tick on around, we'll see that Coeur d'Alene is just inside the area. Spokane is not. An interesting thing to notice. Moving over to the Midwest, we will see a huge delta area, and notice how thick the Missouri and Mississippi rivers are. They will be renamed the River of Cooperation and the River of Opportunity. This is Maltone, south of Chicago. It does not include Chicago. Most of these safe areas do not include any major cities. We'll talk about that also. The tremendous rains coming down cause a deluge of water through this area that turns this into a huge delta, which the masters renamed Harvest Bay. Look at it a little bit more closely here. They also renamed this area Celebration Island in deference to its previous history with the Mardi Gras, and also because of the celebrations that would be held after the harvests in this bay. Now, what are they going to be harvesting in this bay is a logical question to ask. Well, the projection is that the waters will recede after the 2-year cleansing through rain is over, and that all this rich soil and silt that will then come down here will turn that whole area into the richest, most fertile farmland ever. And that substantial portions of the entire U.S. will be able to be fed from the crops grown just in Harvest Bay. Now, this brings up an interesting point having to do with food and earth changes. One of the first things that everyone tells you to do is to store food. Sunbury has a whole list of things to do. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. Why do you think they call them the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Because their prophecies from Joseph Smith say that these are the latter days. This is the end of one age and the beginning of another. Almost every devout Mormon family has a 2-year supply of food stored up as you sit here, and they are ready for famine, pestilence, or whatever. Well, Sunbear recommends that you store quite a bit of food, and one of my theories is that he over-recommends the amount you should store, and the reason for that is that there's one thing being overlooked. A lot of the information says that during the time of transition, our vibrational rate will raise, and that we will only eat a fraction of the amount of food that we do now, just like 10%. And we will be intuitively guided to wild edibles and foodstuffs, and we'll start using herbs to heal ourselves like we did before there were doctors and penicillin and that kind of thing. And so as our vibrational rate goes up, you'll find that you eat and sleep much less. Now, there are some things you can do right now, in my opinion, to get a sense of what that's like. Any product you can find that oxygenates your blood will do that for you to a greater or lesser extent. Many of the Sunrider products, KM, which is being sold here, is an herbal supplement channeled through Carl Urach. Stop Drops, Aerobic Oxygen. There is a whole list of products like that. Whichever one you're intuitively guided to, give it a try. Any type of herbal or other preparation which will oxygenate your blood will help move you into that area of raising your vibrational rate. This is a new cooperation mountain range that Saint Germain said would rise up during the time of changes as a symbol of national cooperation. And again, is this gloom and doom? Do we have a new beautiful mountain range representing national cooperation? Not to me. It's all part of the natural cleansing and purification process that we've gone through many times before. And if you happen to be hanging out in a place like this with your cross-country skis, you may not be having buildings fall on you and floods and rioting and looting and so forth as may very well take place in the major cities. The tip of Florida from about Lake Okeechobee south is supposed to go in. Again, now this is interesting. This is a fairly recent prophecy through Lori Wilkins from Saint Germain. Edgar Casey years ago said that almost all of Florida would go in the drink. Has human consciousness shifted since Edgar Casey made his prophecies? Have the people who live up in this part of Florida somehow shifted their consciousness and raised it so that that part of Florida doesn't need to be purified? I don't know, but it is interesting to notice the slight differences in some of these prophecies. If you've been to Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, or Miami recently, you will know there is no hope for that area. We were just down there. The energy, and in the Florida Keys, we were in the Florida Keys, and this B-29 flew over and dropped mosquito poison all over us. And then it came back and did it again and again. 6 times the B-29 flew over, dropping mosquito poison all over the Florida Keys. Great place to live. This area, in my opinion, is due for a major cleansing, and it's beyond hope. The energy down in the Miami area is kind of like that. Let's go up to the northeast. The primary change that is expected to happen in the northeast part of the United States is not in geography, but in weather. As we shall see, the poles are going to shift, and the North Pole will end up being twice as close to us as it is now. And there will also be, more importantly, a jet stream coming through that is Arctic in nature, and this area will become similar to northern Alaska. So this is what the northeast U.S. is supposed to be ending up like by the year 2001, according to this scenario. So if you like to cross-country ski in 60 below and high winds, you're going to love it here. Being more specific, Maine, almost all of Maine, will go into the ocean. You see it here, it says water and ice and a breakup of land. The whole East Coast is expected to break up. The Nez Perce Indians say this as well as Lori Wilkins. The East Coast will break up into thousands of little tiny islands, none of which can be predicted exactly where they will end up being. We'll take a close look here at New York. New York is one of the areas, like Spokane, where the energies have been misdirected so grossly that the only way they can be returned is through a major and long-term cleansing process. Now, why are all of us stacked up here today in this hotel and we're surrounded by all these people who are piled up one on top of another on this little bitty island? Did you ever think about that? There has got to be one of the most incredibly positive vortexes on the planet underneath here. There are millions of people who are piling themselves up just to try to feel the energy. But so many of them have come here, and so many of them have misdirected the energy that it's gotten completely out of balance. And the masters told Lori that the entire area of New York and New Jersey into the border of Pennsylvania would become a huge bay. And they called it Reconciliation Bay. And they said that this would be the most long-lasting and most thorough purification of any part of the United States. So that this area, New Jersey, all the way to Pennsylvania, would return to its original pristine state of beauty. There would be one island that would remain in this bay. And on it would remain the Statue of Liberty, as a symbol of the original reason for the founding of this country. Justice and liberty. It's what we came here for. Remember 200 and some years ago? Is that what we're getting now? No. So this Statue of Liberty will be protected from all the elemental changes, quakes and winds and so forth, and will remain there as a symbol of the original reason for the founding of this country. Down in Washington, D.C., a similar thing will take place. The Washington monuments will also be preserved and protected as symbols of the old U.S. So in a sense, I guess you could say we started this country with the intention to get rid of taxation and oppression and have liberty and justice, and it was going pretty well for a while when we had guys like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and other metaphysicians and Masons who were running the country. But as things have progressed now, we've gone the other direction. And our rights are being taken away from us. And in fact, we're heading toward what's being called the New World Order, which is an attempt by various people all over the globe to gather together and create a one-world government. And Bush mentioned it on September 11th, and one of the Soviet diplomats has also spoken of it, saying that the Iraq's invasion of Kuwait is a threat to the emerging New World Order. I encourage you to pay close attention to anything you hear or read about this New World Order. It's an attempt to bring all the nations of the earth together so that there will be no more wars. But it's also an attempt to establish control over each and every person. And the cashless monetary system is a very important part of that. When you cannot buy or sell without them knowing how you're doing it and where you're doing it, then they will have a very tight control over you. There is much, much more to be said about that. And in fact, I would specifically recommend that you connect with some of the work of Bill Cooper in that respect. And I will give you his address and phone number before we conclude here. So we move down the coast. The Great Lakes will become all one large lake called Unity Lake. Lake Michigan will drain right through the city of Chicago, a major purification. Lake Erie will drain right through Cleveland, and so on. Are you starting to get the feel for what happens to major cities during a time of cleansing?
Where's Detroit?
Detroit. Toronto is right here, and these lakes no longer exist. They just drain. Buffalo, Detroit here.
Still there?
Yes. Well, all these things are still there. They may just look real different than they do now. Yeah. Just about any major city. Now, see, there's another thing about major cities that you have to consider, the human element. Okay, let's say you're in LA and the water's starting to come in, or San Francisco. The ocean water level is rising. Have any of you been down to the Sand Bridge or Virginia Beach or Ocean City now? They've built these huge 9-foot high steel walls to keep the ocean back from the coast. The ocean comes right in and hits up against these walls. The beaches are eroding away. When that starts happening at a much quicker rate, let's say in San Francisco, what do you do, or in LA, what do you do with about 6 or 7 million people when the water's coming in and covering up the city? And the sewage lines are broken and the water services aren't working and all the food that's been on the grocery shelves is gone. It's going to get real ugly. People are going to take their guns and they're going to loot and they're going to kill and they're going to do whatever they can to stay alive. And the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has absolutely nothing to do with federal emergencies, but is being set up to create a sort of a martial law takeover of the U.S. in the event of an emergency, will not be of any great help either. Again, these things like FEMA and the New World Order and so on are beyond the scope of this presentation. But there's a great deal of information available on it that I could not over-encourage you to A, seek out, and B, pay attention to when you see it in the media. And by the way, you'll see more of it if you listen to National Public Radio than if you listen to Dan Rather. Almost in every country or state in the U.S. is National Public Radio. It's not funded by the government, and they will give you a little clearer idea of what's going on than most places will. However, there are other sources that are even better, and we'll give you a couple of those at the end. Alaska becomes much warmer, and they find that there is no land up here as this ice melts. It is said to have gone through most of its major changes in 1964 and will be a fairly good place to be during the time of transition. Much warmer and looking a little more like that. The Hawaiian Islands will be renamed by the masters, said they would be called Trinity Islands. 3 of them would remain. Oahu and Molokai would have some earthquake activity which would cause them to drop. Hawaii, Maui, and thank goodness, Kauai will still remain. And it was said that they would return to their original primitive state because of the isolation during the time of changes, which is extremely good news for the Earth Mother, because the ancient Kahuna shamanistic tradition there in the islands is one of the most powerful medicines for the healing of the earth that's ever existed. And if you have a specific interest in that, Serge Kalele King, who is a Kahuna shaman, is here speaking this weekend. Polar shifts. The first polar shift is expected to take place when the meteor strikes the Nevada desert and will be fairly minor. The second shift will be major, going to the center of Greenland, and the third shift, again very major, to the northeast corner of Hudson Bay. Looking at it on an actual globe, a minor shift here, a very major shift, and so on. Lori was told in this channeled information that this first shift would be a small one made by the Earth Mother in an attempt to shift human consciousness, a wake-up call, if you will. The second shift would be a much more dramatic and radical shift, and a much stronger attempt to shift human consciousness, a bigger wake-up call. This final shift here, she said, would be brought about by a shift in human consciousness that would cause the Earth to move to this final harmonic resting place. I say harmonic, you're probably looking at me cross-eyed. But when we look at the new weather patterns that it creates, if the Earth ends up with its axis here, you will see that it will make the U.S. a very pleasant place to live for the next 1,000 years or so. The equator will move. It will come up from New Guinea to about Tibet on the eastern part of the U.S., and of course it'll drop down here from the top toward the bottom of South America. The most significant shift as far as your lifestyle is concerned is the wind patterns, though. Where the North Pole is incidental. It depends on the weather. Arctic cold jet streams are projected to be coming through the Great Lakes region, the Northeast, and right here through New York. Hot temperate winds will be coming up through Virginia, the Carolinas, Florida, and the Gulf area. Hot arid wind will be coming up, just like it always does, from the Baja and Arizona, and we have a hot moist air, similar to what we get in Hawaii now coming into the Pacific Northwest, which turns it into a tropical area. Now again, Seattle being tropical sounds weird. It's been happening for hundreds of thousands of years. There's nothing unusual about this at all. What this does is that we have cold air here but warm air in 3 other areas which all converge in the center of the United States, creating for the most part a very mild temperate climate. No more blizzards in Denver, shirt sleeve weather like Florida in the winter, except without the humidity or the bugs. Right? Most of the U.S. will be very comfortable, very temperate. We won't have the radical extremes in temperature that we're experiencing now. Now, we're going to give you a tour of these safe protected areas as they're projected on this map. Keep in mind the climate as we move around the U.S. here. Now, for those of you physics people, the vortex structure of these projected areas is as indicated herein. Let's look at this one first. Pretend like you're flying over this in an airplane and you're looking down on it. These are pyramids, and you're looking down on them. This is the top of the pyramid. That's one side, this is a side, and that's a side. So you're looking down. All 4 of these pyramids join together at this apex point. Now this dotted line that you see here indicates the perimeter of 2 other pyramids, which are easier to comprehend if you see them this way, one pointing up, the other pointing down, which are set right in there so that the top of this pyramid and the bottom of that pyramid are in perfect alignment with the apex point of the other 4. 6 pyramids all touching together at 2 points and creating a vortex energy that is said to take negativity from the Earth and shoot it off the planet. A very fancy arrangement. It took Doug Scheffler months and months to research this because the masters gave him all the measurements in the metric system. They don't work in the U.S. system. That tells you something about the U.S. system. They gave it all to him in meters. This is a painting that can help you visualize these ascended cities, these golden cities, exist in the etheric, as it were. And so this can kind of help you visualize what an ascended area might look like, or a golden city. The one closest to here is called Wahani. The masters gave each of these vortex areas a name. Wahani is an African name, and it's a hot, temperate area, and each of these vortex areas have certain attributes. Wahani is justice, liberty, and freedom. What Laurie was told is that in each of these vortex areas, the light workers would work against the opposite of the attributes, the opposite of justice, liberty, and freedom. Now, if you've been to Macon, Georgia lately, or Waycross, Georgia, or down in that part of the country, you know that there's been a little trouble with justice, liberty, and freedom, especially for people who have black skin down there. And the light workers in this area are working right now in the opposite of those attributes so that they will learn about it, and when the transition is complete, people will travel here from all over the country and the world to learn about these attributes. This is Greenville, South Carolina. This is Atlanta, Georgia. Macon, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and Waycross. If you want to figure out where somebody you know lives, just look at one of the maps. Buy one or don't buy one, but look at them. They're fun to do that with. Now, heading west, we come to Maltone, which we mentioned. This is a Nordic name, and it has a cool climate because of the cold jet streams coming over the Great Lakes. This is Springfield, Illinois. This is Indianapolis, Indiana. At the top is Chicago, unfortunately not in the vortex. This, by way of interesting, is St. Louis, Missouri, which becomes the confluence of the Missouri and the Mississippi, and is renamed the City of Purity, which it will certainly be. This is Evansville, Indiana. About a 350-mile around and 350 miles high vortex area there. The attributes are fruition and attainment. Those wishing to learn about fruition and attainment will travel to these areas during that time. Up in the Pacific Northwest, we have the golden city of Shalaha. It's an Eastern Indian name and a tropical climate during the time it changes. Abundance, prosperity, and healing are the attributes of that area, and having started my workshops up there a year and a half ago, I can guarantee you that that's not what's happening. Light workers are definitely dealing with the opposite of that. This is Kalispell, Montana, Helena, Montana, Lewiston, Idaho, where Lori Wilkins lives, and down here is Salmon, Idaho, and I run wilderness survival expeditions with drug and alcohol troubled teenage kids, and we do that right about here. There's absolutely nothing out there at all. Doesn't that seem like a good place for it, don't you think? This is Livingston, Montana, where Elizabeth Clare Prophet and her group are located. Gobian is the second to last vortex down in the Phoenix area. Apparently, the edge of the vortex runs right through the Mesa-Phoenix border, for those of you who know that area, and the coastline comes to there. This is Gallup, New Mexico, and there really are no cities down in this area here. It's an Arabic name, Gobian, a hot, arid climate, transformation, harmony, and peace are the attributes of Gobian. And again, remember, the Bay of Harmony, tranquil, healing, harmonious energies all along this bay up here to Denver. Sedona, Arizona is just off the coastline. Flagstaff, the home of the San Francisco Peaks, where the Kachinas go home to every year according to the Hopis, and the Hopi lands are right up in here. This is Durango, Colorado. That's the intersection of the Four Corners area. This is the Hopi Reservation. Now, you need to know that this coastline is very shallow water. The master said this water would be so shallow you could walk out for an extensive distance and still not even be waist deep in it. No ocean-going vessels or boats would be able to move in the water, and therefore it would be very tranquil and serene. Another thing to know, people say, well, Sedona still be there. Phoenix is 1,100 feet in elevation now. Sedona is 4,500 feet. San Francisco peaks are almost 13,000 feet high. So if they drop in elevation because of the quakes, then they will still exist. You may have to take a boat to get to Sedona, but the vortex areas and so on will still exist. You'll be able to still climb up into higher ground. The San Francisco peaks, of course, would still be there. Flagstaff is 7,000 feet high, so it can drop a couple thousand feet and it'll still be 5,000 feet above the water. So any mountainous areas, of course, along this coastline would still be accessible. There may be some changes in the way we travel after some of the earth changes. You may have to do things a little bit differently. You may have to walk instead of taking the normal routes, or pack in with horses in the way that it's been done for a long time. But the idea is that as you travel through the countryside, if necessary, to reach one of the golden cities, that once you get to the edge, that the earth changes will be minimal within this protected area, and that the major transportation routes and bridges will be intact. And will in fact make these areas become major transportation routes of people coming and going with goods and services and so on. This is Klima. For those of you who may have been feeling a draw to Colorado, it is the American Indian name. It's a mild, temperate climate. Continuity, balance, and harmony are the attributes of Klima. This is Denver here, which is renamed the Golden Port. This is Colorado Springs. That's Durango for reference. And this is McCook, Nebraska, Cheyenne, Wyoming right here. These are the new Cooperation Mountains. And Lori was told that Christone would become the new center of national government. It would not be a federalized government that we know now, but more bioregional in nature. But there would be a central headquarters, which would be located in Christone. And that's a little tiny town somewhere near the Apex area in Klima. And if you ever saw the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where Richard Dreyfuss and other people were making their mashed potato Devil's Towers and being drawn fanatically to Devil's Tower, Wyoming, well, that's going on in Christone, Colorado right now. There are people showing up there from all over the world. Many spiritual organizations are moving their headquarters there, and most of them cannot give you a logical answer about why. They're just being drawn there. It's an amazing phenomenon. A little tiny town getting much bigger. Christone, Colorado, right near here. This area is a bit of a hot spot during the time changes. You've got the Klima Vortex, Christone, the Cooperation Mountains, and according to the masters, this area northwest of Kansas City, Missouri, will be called the center of fire. And they say this is the location of the heart chakra of the earth, and it runs straight through to the other side. And at this site will be a universal gathering place, not just with people from around the earth, but also beings from other solar systems. And then this will be a portal that has to do with intergalactic travel. In the book Starseed Transmissions, this is one of my recommended readings. Ken Carey makes some comments that I think are extremely relevant along the area of advice. If we look at what all is going to be happening and so on, people frequently say, great, well, what am I supposed to do about that? I'd like to quote to you one passage out of his book, which I find to be one of the best sources of information about this kind of thing. He's talking in here about what he calls the psychological process, which is this process of moving from a left brain, male, dominant, analytical, figure it out, plan and execute your life orientation into a balanced perspective using the feminine and the masculine together. And he says that any belief, any concept, any conviction that you might have that truly mirrors what is present in the mind of God will still be there on the other side of the psychological process. So you have nothing to fear in releasing these things. What he's saying is that all the beliefs and expectations and imaginations that you have about who you are and what you're supposed to be doing and how and where and when, let them go. He says you have nothing to fear in releasing these things. All that has been sanctified by God will continue to exist. Only that which has sought to cheat you of your destiny will perish. It is really very simple. Let it all go and see what the Lord has in store. Now that's quite a piece of advice. Let it all go and see what the Lord, this is channeled through the Archangel Raphael, see what spirit your higher power has in store. Any hesitation that you feel is only indicative of a continued trust in fear and reason figuring it out. He says these are the false gods of this age, and they will continue to enslave you until your trust is restored in love and life. Trust God implicitly, and the truth of His divine design will be revealed in every situation. Specific information for each and every situation is being supplied to you constantly by the source of infinite wisdom. Why not trust it? Well, I would say the reason most of us don't trust it is we don't recognize it as that. There's too much interference going on. He says your first impulse will always be, as it has always been, the advice of your Creator. You have all the pertinent information in the universe available simply to the asking. When you are aware of your totality, the life impulse will transmit to you everything that you need to know in any given situation. Its message will always come as your first spontaneous impulse. Be attentive. The final words in his chapter on the psychological process. Its message will always come as your first spontaneous impulse. Be attentive. Do we follow our spontaneous impulses, our gut feelings, our hunches? Usually not. What he's suggesting here is that as you start to do that, things will be very different. He says as soon as you begin to look outside yourself as individually defined, out into the world around you, to see how you can make yourself useful, as soon as you begin to serve in the capacity you were created to fulfill, you find your path of power, as Sunbear would say. You will begin to share in the peace and happiness of your Creator. You will experience a state of consciousness so superior to any you have experienced before that it will make your previous life seem but a dream. When you actually see the kingdom of heaven in operation on earth, all that you require for survival will be drawn to you like a magnet. Life will be simple and easy. Problems will fall away like dust from your eyes. With great clarity and peace, you will begin to do what needs to be done. Life will begin to work extraordinarily well. See the new world unfold before you, even as the old falls away, like leaves falling from a tree in the autumn of the year. Do not focus on the world that is polarizing towards selfishness and fear. Do not pay attention to the old that is crumbling around you. What has been shall soon be no more. Let the dead bury their dead and concentrate solely on the building of the new. That's pretty good advice. Lazarus, one of my favorite spooks, says that there will be two worlds during the time of changes. In one world there will be cataclysm and earthquakes and volcanic activity and terrible diseases that they won't be able to find results for helping, and people will be fighting and dying and terrible. In another world, people will be living close to the earth, in cooperative communities in an ancient sacred way in developing their spirituality like never before. And he said both of these worlds will exist simultaneously. And which one you are in is going to be a function of your own consciousness. Individuals who are filled with selfishness and hatred and fear and anger and carrying that around with them, the darkness, will be drawn into the areas of darkness. Those individuals who are focused on healing themselves and the planet will be bringing the light in and be drawn to the areas of light. The safe protected areas perhaps on this map, or thousands of other safe protected areas wherever you may find them throughout the United States. It is not going to be a time of gloom and doom except for those who need that on a soul evolutionary level. And this whole idea of dying during the time of earth changes is a little bit over-publicized because there is no such thing as death. We forget it's an illusion. Remember, we started out in the spirit realm, we came down here to do this little dance, and we're going back up into the spirit realm. It's like into the spirit, out of the spirit. There's no death. There's no reason to freak out. Doug Scheffler was given the information when the Nimitz Freeway collapsed and those 200 people were killed, all prearranged by soul agreement. He said those people are all now spirit guides on the other side helping their friends and family. They knew that that was going to happen before they ever incarnated. It was a choice they made. Do not go to fear around death. There is no death. We're simply in the physical or we're back in the spirit realm. That's all there is to it. Very helpful to keep that in mind when you're talking about these concepts. The way that we'll conclude after the question and answer period is I'd like to share with you a very beautiful earth healing meditation. And it is not one we will do with our eyes closed. We'll do it with our eyes open. We'll have a series of slides. And what we'll be focusing on is seeing the earth is healed and returned to its original pristine state of beauty, and therefore accelerating that process occurring as we go along here.
remember the words of Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of concerned, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has."